Mark Ratcliffe, who is the chairman, secretary of the Hatfield East Society. He got the history bug when he retired, and he has been engaging in that ever since, I think. So he's written and talked about a number of local things around Hatfield Heath, but tonight he's going to talk to us about the history of Matching Airfield. So Mark.
Thank you. Yes, so I grew up in Hatfield Heath, lived there 30 years. I don't know, do you want to pop?
Do you want them both off, Mark? I can put a light up in the middle.
Yeah, if we can get these off. Is that all right with everyone?
And also, if you want the heating on or off, just...
Yeah, actually,
off,
I don't know, it's
off,
quite warm now,
So on.
Okay, we haven't got a mic available tonight, so I will try and speak up and so I can hear. If you can't, please shout. I grew up in Hatfield Heath, lived there for 30 years, and now live in Bishop Stortford, so I know the area reasonably well. I can remember cycling out to the airfield as a young lad and seeing some of the buildings, the runways and the perimeter tracks. But I didn't really know much about the history until, as has been said, I retired and I was able to get into a bit more research. Anyway, so this is about the airfield that was built in Matching Green and built at the beginning of, during the course of the Second World War. Just get all my bits and pieces. Right. Yes. A lot of the information I used in putting this together came from this website, which is an excellent resource. It was originally created by someone that was involved with the 391st Bombardment Group, and then it went into a decline, and a chap called Steve Sharp managed to recover the information. He's expanded on it greatly. It's got absolutely almost anything you could want to know about the 391st on there. It's got lists of all the missions they flew, who was flying which planes, photographs, other documents. It is really a fantastic resource. So if you just put in 391st BG in a search, and come up if your enthusiasm is fired up. I put this map in the slideshow just for those of you that may not know where Matching is. Yes. Okay, so pointer. Matching Green is down here, Hatfield Heath, Hallingbury are up here. And I created this diagram from an old pre-war map, and I was just interested in what work went on in creating the airfield. So the green areas were existing woodland before the airfield was built. Nearly all that was removed. The red dots buildings that had to be demolished. You can see a large farm there, a couple of other buildings and a barn complex. And the blue lines show roads that had to be dug up and rerouted or just blocked off. The black line is the outline of the perimeter track, and the three straight lines are the runways. Now, when this was built, or surveyed, if you like, and I believe it was surveyed in the 1930s, you know, we were already making plans for conflict. And at the top of the main runway there's a very old, I think 17th century house. And apparently the man from the ministry went up and knocked on the door. The lady of the house, who was apparently a very formidable woman, answered. He said, "Oh, excuse me, I'm just letting you know we're going to be building an airfield here, and you know, your house is going to have to go. You're going to have to move out." And she said, "No, we're not." And so the story goes. She gave him such a hard time that they actually went away and redrew the plans. So it was moved slightly further south. However, the planes did take off on that main runway right over the top of the house, and I've had it from a lady that lived there at the time. As a young girl, she said the racket was absolutely incredible. So this is a schematic diagram of the airfield. As I say, we've got the three main runways, perimeter track all the way around. These loops here are called spectacle loops, and they're hard standings where the planes were kept whilst they weren't in operation. Most of the work on planes was done out in the open. The engineers, the mechanics would work on the planes. They did have large hangars that they could bring them into, but as I say, that was the exception rather than the rule. At the bottom here is the bomb dump, and that was positioned as far away as was practically possible, so that if there was a problem, if a bomb exploded and caused a chain reaction, so the big explosion, there'd be as little damage to the surrounding areas. That's the runways, the hard standings, and any other buildings. Off to the right here, there was what was called the dispersed buildings, and that was largely used for accommodation and other things such as hospitals. There was a whole sort of village, basically built there, all in largely Nissen huts, some brick buildings. This is a composite of aerial photos that I found online that was taken in 1942, and it shows the airfield under construction. So you can just about make out the line of the main runway. One of the cross runways is going in there, and you can see that they've actually cut a path through this woodland to put the runway, but they haven't actually at this point cleared the rest of it. That all went. So this was early stages of the construction of it. This is a later shot when all the concrete had largely been done, and again you can see the basic pattern. 3 runways, so that basically whichever way the wind was blowing, they could take off into the wind. Now I believe that although that was the main runway, most of the activity tended to happen on this one. We spoke to a gentleman who lived in a farm there, and they said they used to come over the farm. That's another aerial photograph, and you can just see, if you look carefully, some planes on that hard standings there. Nice and all down there. And this pretty much is how it looks today. A lot of the concrete was dug up and used, I believe, for building roads such as the A12. There's an awful lot happened in East Anglia with these redundant airfields, and the concrete was put to good use. However, there is a very small length of full width runway there, one of the cross runways. Most of the perimeter track is still extant. You can't drive completely all the way around. There's a track, including a bit of concrete up there of the main runway, but that is, you can drive a Jeep or a truck down there. So, you know, even today, after 80 odd years, it's still, you can still make out the pattern of it. And this is the road through the bomb dump. And just as an aside, I was sort of talking to someone earlier on about the number of airfields around here. The formatting has slightly gone astray, but these the blue smudges should be stars, but they represent airfields of the 9th Air Force. So the red one here is Matching, and then that's the existing Stansted Airport, and then almost all the way along the A120 to Colchester there were airfields, a couple down this way, and the odd one or two outlying. But yeah, this was very much Marauder country. Most of those ones along the A120 were flying Martin Marauders, which we'll look at the plane a bit later. So, the airfield was built by an American aviation engineering battalion, the 834th. And they came over from the States. They set sail on the 6th of August 1942 aboard what was then named the USS West Point, which previously had been the SS America, a very luxurious cruise liner. And I think some of the engineers actually slept in the ballroom. They basically, most of the fittings were stripped out, and it was converted as a troop ship. And but yeah, the reports say that they slept in the ballroom. It arrived in Liverpool on the 17th of August, and they travelled down by train to Saltire Station, and then were bussed in or trucked into the Matching area, where they, I guess they would have set up tents as accommodation initially. And I was just reading the unit history, and I didn't actually realise that it's a very long day. They basically worked from 5 o'clock in the morning through to 2 o'clock the next morning, virtually non-stop. They had a few breaks for maintaining vehicles. They worked in different shifts, and so whilst one shift was on, the others were getting ready for the next one. It was originally laid out, and I mentioned this, as a heavy bomber base, so it was designed to take planes such as Lancasters, Stirlings, Flying Fortresses. The Martin Marauder that actually operated from there was what we call a medium bomber, much lighter, wouldn't need quite so much runway to take off, and that's why I guess they were able to use that cross runway. So these are just some photographs of the men and equipment at work. They use bulldozers, these great earth movers. I think when they first arrived, the equipment came over slightly behind them, and so they say they were working with some fairly rudimentary British trucks and things that they weren't quite used to, and probably not as powerful and as capable of doing the trick. There was also, I have heard reports that some of the early work was actually started by civilian contractors, and there was another aviation battalion that came in and did some work on here. It was basically the 834th. Now this is a shot showing the farm that was demolished. This here, Potting's Farm. That was cleared. I think this is the cross runway, and the path of the main runway runs along there. So you can see these great bulldozers here shifting, levelling, and moving earth around. Various other trucks of taking material in and out. They set up a great big concrete mixing plant area with these huge hoppers and a blister hanger there, which we'll see a bit later. That's still there. This was virtually in the middle of the area where the runways crossed. After the airfield had been built, that was moved to another site, and that is still there today. But you can see that the scale of this, these huge mountains of gravel, aggregate and cement that would be required to pour all the concrete. And I think, again, I'm not quite sure, I think that this is, again, it's probably the cross runway, and I think the main runway might run up there. It looks like they would have had to clear. Not 100% sure. These great caterpillar-driven machines were the concrete layers. Basically, they had concrete mixed up, fed into the back, and they used these great scoops to scoop the concrete out, and then it was levelled and rolled and made into the concrete. And again, you can see these huge piles of materials for the making of the concrete. This is them in action, two side by side, and another one there. This is the main runway, and like I said earlier, you can see where they just cleared enough to build the runway, and then at a later stage, once they've poured all the concrete, this woodland was cleared. This is a levelling machine, so they set up rails on either side of the concrete and then ran that along and levelled it all off. Whilst doing that, they had to build accommodation for themselves to live in and for the incoming airmen and support teams. So largely, as I said, Nissan-type huts and with various brick buildings as well. They came over in August. As the winter progressed, they really struggled with the mud. You can imagine what Essex clay can be like when it gets wet. We're all aware of that. And it really did become quite a problem, and so they struggled to... Their main focus was to build the runways and the perimeter track. But I think during the winter they found that they needed to get the concrete areas down for the other areas as well. On the 27th of February 1943, so about 6-7 months after they started work, the airfield had its first visitor. There's a Lysander plane. We don't know where it came from. They did have Lysanders at Sawbridge, but I'm not sure that the dates fit in. But I guess it was either bringing someone in to visit, or it was in trouble and it just needed somewhere to put down. So that was the first visitor. Unfortunately, this photograph isn't clear enough to make out any markings or serials to further identify it. Whilst they were working, they had visitors from various entertainers coming to visit. So this is Bob Hope, Francis Langford, not Bonnie Langford as I did say, and a guy called Adolphe Manjou, who's the guitarist there. They also had James Cagney visit. They were doing the tours around all the bases in the UK. Another thing that happened, that each unit was contacted by the Red Cross to adopt an orphan, and the 834th Engineering Battalion did their bit. So they adopted four young children. I think they were all girls, and they sort of, I suppose, a bit like sponsored them. They invited them onto the base. I don't know if I've got another photo of that. They invited them onto the base, through parties for them, and took a special interest in sort of trying to support them. That was all done through the Red Cross. Now, in addition to that, they threw parties and special events to the locals. The chap that we spoke to at the farm can remember being very friendly with the guys. He said that he had more contact with the engineers than the US, the pilots and the air crew, and certainly much more when the Americans left and it was used by the RAF. He said they didn't have anything to do with the locals and the children there. But so they integrated quite closely with the locals. I'm sure they were down to the Checkers on Matching Green having drinks and socialising, especially with the young ladies around. This is a photo of, I think this is the sewage plant that they built. Again, it's all the practicalities of having a large base with, you know, hundreds, thousands of men on site. You need electricity, running water, and yeah, you need to get rid of the sewage. So they built a plant that is still in existence today at I think High Easter, still functioning, and yeah. This is a technical site. This is a site that's quite close to the runway, or to the perimeter tracks and the runways. So this is where the mechanics, if you like, would be situated, so they'd be able to come out when the planes came back after a raid. They needed servicing, tweaking, repairing, all the rest of it. And just there, you can see the framework of one of the large hangars that was built as well. And this is it. You can see they're absolutely huge. They're lifting into place doors that could be obviously slid aside to allow the aircraft in. I think I don't know how many planes they could accommodate at one time. That particular hangar stood until I think the 1980s, and then it was demolished, probably demolished in the 1980s, and moved wholesale over to Northfield Airfield, where it was put up, still there today, and it was used for the filming of, if anyone remembers, the Crystal Maze. It was a sort of a game sort of challenge show that was hosted by Richard O'Brien. But that is still standing, although not on the matching site. This is the perimeter track. They're laying drainage there to take the water away. And on the 26th of November, so over a year they spent building it, they handed it over officially to the US, 9th US Army Air Force. So I've just put some statistics down there. So 1.5 million man-hours it took them. 120,000 cubic yards of concrete. It's basically enough for a two-lane road for 45 miles length. 350 buildings, 1.25 million bricks laid, 600,000 cubic yards of earth excavated, 94 acres of woodland cleared, 6 miles of water drains, 12 miles of French drains, they're the ones you can see in that previous photograph. Sewage system that could cope with 2,500 people. They had an 11,000 volt main supply connected into the system at Bishop Stortford, and they had a 10,000 volt generator backup, which was powered by diesels.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah?
We saw on that for all the different airfields with the Americans. Mm-hmm. Obviously, materials were in short supply.
Yeah.
So, how did they bring quite a bit from the trucks they brought over from the States, but the rest, how did they get this stuff?
There's one thing I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know if anyone else might have. Yeah, I thought they might.
They had advanced locally robots picking all low pitch supply, and things like cables were from Enfield standard cables. I think it mainly supplied in-house, it was from the UK.
And cement, would they get that? Cement from the UK as well?
Cement, yeah. All that bulk stuff.
Okay, there you go. And as part of the handover, they had a big parade of their trucks and big display, all sort of fanfares, what have you. Just on that, the Aviation Engineering Battalion, they were combat troops. Whilst they were at matching, they spent time training as regular soldiers. They went into the D-Day Normandy beaches. They were due to land on D-Day itself as a fighting unit. Due to problems with the tides and what have you, they didn't actually land on D-Day itself. They went on D-Day +1. And by D-Day +3, they had built an emergency landing strip on the cliffs above the Omaha beaches. You know, so again, that's the sort of thing, the logistics that had to be sort of operated. We needed to get planes able to land in Normandy, you know, rather than flying across the channel once we'd established that bridgehead. But they went, they were expected to fight, they carried weapons, but as soon as they got to their objective, they then started building. And the reports say that the initial, whilst they were building that first landing strip, they were under attack. They were suffering sniper fire at least. You know, so they then travelled throughout Europe and into Germany, and they were always building and repairing new airfields for the Air Force to use. So it handed over to the 9th Air Force, and the 391st Bombardment Group were the group that occupied it. They were activated in January 1943 and spent basically a year in the States training and learning to fly their Marauders. They then came to matching in the end of January 1944 and stayed until the end of September basically at matching. They flew the B-26 Martin Marauder. This was their sort of route, if you like. They were in the southeast of the States doing their training, and then to get across the Atlantic, they took what was termed the South Atlantic route. Early groups had flown. Early groups flew up across Greenland, Iceland, that way, but particularly in the winter months that was deemed quite dangerous, so they took a longer route down through South America, crossing into, I think, the Ascension Islands, across to Africa, up the east coast of Africa, and into England. The group consisted of 4 squadrons, the 72nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th. The group's emblem was the yellow triangles, that identifies the 391st, and each squadron carried different markings, so P2, T6, 08 and 4L, and then each aircraft would carry its own individual code number. Now, when I was a kid, I was into planes and mainly RAF planes, but the Martin Marauder was not one that was really on my radar. I knew about flying Fortresses, Liberator bombers, Mitchells, but this never really sort of came on my sort of radar. I don't remember Airfix ever making a kit or anything like that. But it was a fairly dependable plane. Just got a bit of film clip. Some of you may have seen this if you were here a bit earlier. This shows the planes in the States, and they're flying to Myrtle Beach on the east coast, where there was a bombing range. And it just shows you Obviously this isn't operational, so they're not under any attack, but it just shows you the sort of formation that they'd be flying, pretty close to one another, and they flew in a particular pattern, and that was basically one to give good coverage on their bombing patterns, and two so that each aircraft could cover others when if they were under attack. If they were under attack by German fighters.
Sorry to disturb, I think there's a call coming to the tree.
Okay. So as I say, that just gives a bit of a feel for how they'd be flying in their combat formations. So I've got some photographs of planes, men. They often adopted dogs. You know, it was a pretty brutal thing. You know, you're flying off every couple of days into enemy territory. They often lost comrades and other planes. They were young men. They needed anything to take their mind off it. You can see they've got kegs of beer. Bicycles were the means of transport that they generally used. They would sometimes get a truck or a bus into Chelmsford for some recreation. Sometimes they would get passes into London, and they also had some leisure time away, so they would have perhaps 2 weeks or a week away at a place where they would go and stay, just to get away from the routine of flying. The Martin Marauder, as I say, it was generally well liked by the crews, but it was a bit of a pig to learn to fly. I didn't actually know until a couple of weeks ago. It had the highest wing loading of any aircraft in World War II. Basically, what that means is surface area of the wing to the weight of the plane. So because that was very high, it meant you needed to fly quickly to generate enough lift to keep it in the air. It was very prone to stalling, and when inexperienced pilots were learning to fly, that was a problem. A lot of planes were lost in early stages of training. There was a phrase, I think it was called the Baltimore Whore. Martin were based in Baltimore, and there's a phrase, one a day into Tampa Bay, because of the number of planes that crashed. But this will give you a bit of a feel for how quickly you had to land. You weren't flying sort of upright or level, you were flying into the ground almost. Very high speed. This actually is a landing on just one propeller. You can see the other one that's actually feathered there. But once you mastered it, it was very robust. It had a good survival rate against flak and other things. So, as I say, the crews came to like it. And I think it had one of the best survival rates of planes in World War II. However, occasionally things did go wrong, and this is an example that just shows how quickly, when a plane's hit, it can go out of control.
A film taken recently by the US 9th Air Force has a very different angle on war in the air. Marauders, cooperating in the reduction of the Rundstedt salient, used Pathfinder technique in attacking supply centers at Wittlich, Germany. And marauders attacking a railway bridge over the Moselle ran into very heavy flak. A direct hit on a nearby plane was recorded by one of the cameramen.
So you can see it took a hit on the engine basically fell off, and it started spiralling immediately. there's no chance of getting out. You know, you'd be thrown against the edge of the cockpit or the edge of the fuselage. So that was the sort of thing you had to face, seeing and experiencing when you were on raids into Germany. I've got a few more shots of planes on the base. The group took part in the bombing raids on the 6th of June, flew 3 missions. I believe one of them wasn't particularly successful, but the other 2 were. And this is a shot taken from a marauder of Omaha Beach. You can see all the landing craft up there stacked up, they can go in. Forming up into go for a raid, you can see an echelon up there. They generally flew in groups of 6, and then each group of 6 formed up into 3 groups of 6, and then you had 2 groups of the AT. So yeah, that's 36 planes. More. They're bombing up. The planes were given names. That was quite common. The McCarthy's Party was named after James McCarthy, the pilot. They painted bomb markings on that. So this has been annotated a bit. 75 flak holes on her 79th mission. 50 flak holes on her 50th mission. There was some armour plating protection for the pilot, not on the other side of the co-pilot, he could go to hell. But yeah, they would come back, and as I say, that they would be patched up. Some came back with pretty extensive damage, but as I say, they could take an awful lot of punishment. Another one, Pink's Lady, Powerful Katrinka, and Ration Passion. Ration Passion took part in the group's 100th mission, and the group's chaplain went up in her, and they awarded him a special medal for going on the mission. I don't think he's on any of those photos. So the group was matching until middle of September, and by that time, as I say, we'd invaded Normandy, and there were bases becoming available for the marauder groups to be based in France. So they wouldn't have to fly over the Channel, shorter distances, or they could get further into Germany. So the group basically moved. The air crew flew their planes over. Some of the other crew went in C-47 Dakotas, and the equipment all went by sea. They flew to a place called Royaume in France. Unfortunately, during that mission, there was a quite devastating incident where 6 planes flew to Royaume to ferry supplies, and were ordered back in very bad weather. Out of the 6 planes, 3 crashed. They couldn't find their way down, and they basically circled until they ran out of fuel. 11 men were lost that day. It's just part of war, unfortunately. I mean, it's a pretty dirty business. But one of the planes came down in Hatfield Heath, and Steve and myself, we put up a memorial to the 3 crew that perished that day. So the group continued flying until May. Its last mission was at the beginning of May, 45. Flew nearly 300 missions, dispatched over 10,000 planes. Not all of those made took part in what was called the sortie. Some had to turn back, some were dispatched as spares to fill in if a plane failed to make it. But over 10,000 sorties, over 60,000 men flew or manned missions. They encountered enemy aircraft 90 times, destroyed 10 enemy aircraft, possibly another 6, damaged another 30. I think, to me, that's quite surprising, given the number of encounters they had. But yeah, their primary purpose was to get back, and I think they probably suffered with flak damage as much as fighter aircraft. 1,300 times planes came back damaged. The end of war figures said 29 were killed, 67 wounded, and missing in action 198. Once they established the final figure is believed to be 185. We've got a list of the names of all the casualties there. And they dropped over, nearly 16,000 tonnes of bombs. The plane would carry, payload was 4,000. They tend to carry either eight 500-pound bombs or sometimes smaller bombs up to 16. So I've already talked a little about the human cost. This is a story of a pilot, John Kolsch, and his plane and crew. The plane was called Purring Panther, and they went on a mission, and we've got some what I find quite incredible footage here. So this shows the flight of a flight of 6 planes, and it's taken from one of the planes above. And if you look at this plane here, you can see there's 4 white blobs there, and they actually hit that plane below, and you can see the engines being removed. And as we scroll through, you'll see the effect of that. A bit like the video film, as soon as it loses one engine, it starts going to a corkscrew, and it collects the plane by its right side. And you can see this is one plane, it's cut through the tail of the other, and the other plane's starting to go into a dive. And they're falling away. There was this arrow shows another 4 bombs that look as if they're going to fall on that plane. They didn't, thank goodness. I checked the mission records, and those 2 planes were the only losses. So all men on those planes were lost, with the exception of, I think, the pilot of the second plane that was hit. Obviously, what happened there, as I say, the echelons should be staggered so that the bombs drop clear. Clearly, something went wrong with positioning, and that group of 6 either was out of position, or the ones that were dropping the bombs were out of position. I suspect, although I've never seen any sort of footage like that, I suspect that wasn't an uncommon occurrence. You know, when you think the number of planes you had in these raids, all staggered, it wouldn't take much for them to get out of place. But as I say, there we've got camera footage of it. I've already mentioned the 24th September. That was when they came back and lost, couldn't get down because of the bad weather. This one, as I say, ran out of fuel, crashed at Hatfield Heath, demolished, I think, 4 bungalows. And you can just see obviously the tail fin there. You can see this is the top turret. Luckily, although there were a couple of injuries on the ground, but most of the houses were unoccupied, and there were no fatalities of civilians. that house is still there and looks largely the same. And, as I say, we placed a memorial in 2021 there. This was the plane. Talked about nose art. So the nose art on the plane was inspired by this. This is a pin-up done by a guy called Gil Elvden. He was quite a well-known painter of pin-ups, and this is a book of some of his. I've found at least 4 planes of the 391st that are based on girls he painted, and many others, in other groups. But, and yeah, so they based it on very often pin-ups, sometimes Disney characters, sometimes it was a play on words or whatever. Another tragic day for the 391st. This was when they were based in France. 23rd of December they were ordered to attack, I think, a bridge at a place in Germany called Ahrweiler, and they got jumped by, I think, up to between 50 and 70 German fighters. And this is the diagram of the mission. All the planes in red were lost, so 16 planes plus the Pathfinder were shot down. The ones in orange were damaged, and I think in some cases the planes had to be written off when they arrived back home. There was just one plane that escaped without any damage. That was a pretty dark day. So they came back from that mission. Later that day, they put 21 planes up in the air and carried out another raid. They won a citation for that. But that was what they did. You know, you come back, you've seen your mates go down, but the war goes on. You expect it to fly again. So once the Americans left, the airfield was used by the 9th Troop Carrier Command. I haven't been able to find a great deal about its post-American occupation. They were flying C-47s, and as far as I can find out, they were basically practicing parachute drops. They were only there for a very short time. But this is not taken at matching, but that's a sort of group that would be loaded up there. They'd take off and they'd be dropped over the airfield and practice landings and what have you. They were only there a fairly short time, a matter of weeks, and then 38th Group Operational Training and Refresher Unit joined, or took over. They were there for 6 months or so. Now, they were largely tasked with training up glider pilots to fly glider tugs, and they used ex-heavy bombers, the Halifaxes and Sterlings, and I've managed to find a series of photographs on eBay which I bought. So here you've got a Sterling bomber, and you can just see the glider going behind there, and this is a Halifax with another glider there. The gliders were airspeed hawsers, so they were used as troop carriers. Sometimes they carry some equipment. This is another photograph matching, so that's the Sterling. You can see the Type 2 hangar there, and the control tower there, and no planes there. This is an interesting one. This is a Halifax bomber, and you can see it's actually got a jeep strapped underneath and a field gun. At the time they were experimenting with parachuting jeeps and guns in, rather than being loaded up into gliders and then risking a dodgy landing on the glider. They thought they'd try and drop them from a plane. And we've got actual pictures here. So these two, they came down on 4 parachutes. The rest, with single parachutes, would be ammunition boxes, stores or something, much lighter ones. They came down in under 4 parachutes. It was never really very much of a success. They came down very often, crushed the suspension and were undrivable. But yeah, it's an interesting little piece of history that went on in matching. So that's a photo of the control tower and the hangar there. I think these will be buildings that would probably house emergency vehicles, fire engines, ambulances, so that if a plane came in with carrying wounded or in difficulty, they'd be on hand near the control tower to immediately rush out and give aid. Now, although it was a training unit, the airfield was used in March 45 as a satellite station for Ongar, Dunmo Airfield, I think it was, to take part in Operation Varsity, which was the Rhine crossing. And I think there was about 15 gliders towed out of Matching and took part in the operation. And here you can see them all lined up. They're the gliders, the Halifax tow planes, there's Halifax, and we've got another one there. You see the tow cables snaking along there. Yeah, the gliders all lined up. Another shot there. So about April 45, they left, and apparently there was a target towing flight. So they flew a plane called Miles Martinet, and it had this sort of spindle on there that would carry cable, and they'd tow behind a parachute or a windsock type thing that then other planes would come and try and fire at. That's literally all I know. None of these photographs are taken at Matching. They're just examples of the planes that they use there. So with the end of the war, there was no more use for the airfield, but it did come under consideration for perhaps being a London airport. This is 1944 Greater London Plan that I found, and yeah, there Matching Airfield is actually identified as a major airport rather than Stansted up there, as it happened. It was also, I believe, under consideration for use as emergency housing. Obviously, you've got all the Nissan huts, you've got water, electric, sewage, all the facilities there. I think one of the things against it was it wasn't particularly close to any sort of major communication. It didn't have very good bus services or anything like that. So that never took place. It was used as a venue for cycle events. Time trials often took place around the perimeter track. And again, that's the hangar there, that's the main runway. There are many examples of cycle clubs going out there. I think many people used it to learn to drive, all that sort of thing. But eventually it sort of the land was handed back to the farmers, and as I say, the concrete removed and buildings demolished. So these are just some photographs. They're probably getting on for about 10 years old, but reasonably give the situation as it is now. So this is the old hospital site. There's 3 Nissan huts still remaining there. Various bits of concrete in the foreground. The local farmer uses them for storage. And some of them are just sort of derelict and full of junk. I think this was being used for, again, more storage. That's the thickness of the perimeter track. They're great big slabs of concrete and cement. The perimeter tracks still largely extant, but not full width. And that's, I think, the part of one of the runways. If you zoom in, the actual road across the airfield actually does follow the line of one of the cross runways now, or Perry track. And some of the buildings that are still on site, used by various businesses. And that's the blister hangar. You remember the one we saw at the beginning, where they were on the runway.
Where is that one? I'll picture where that one is.
That's behind the technical side. I don't think you can get to it. It's on private land. So as you cross the runway, across the airfield, go past the control tower, and then there are some buildings on the left there, and a track down there. That's the perimeter track, and it's behind there. I'll put it out on the map to later. That building is, can you remind me, Steve?
It was the radio shack.
That's the radio shack, right. And you will sometimes see that aerial whizzing round. That is the gun...
Shooting butts.
Yeah, shooting butt. So the planes, when they used to come back, they would line up there and fire their guns to either to empty them or before a raid, just make sure they're working properly. In the 60s and 70s, it was littered, that area, with various shells and bullets. Someone I know used to spend a lot of time there. The control tower is used by Raytheon, and they link up with the old radio shack, and it's still used for testing various bits of equipment. They're quite protective of it. I think several people have asked to have a look inside, but recently that's been strictly off limits. That's a wartime photo, and that's a more recent one. Again, that has changed very, very, very little. The memorial's been put up there. That was done many years ago, and more recently the Airfield Memorial Trust, I think it is, placed another memorial there. And that just pays tribute to the men of the group. 1992, there was a big reunion of the Marauder men. They came across, spent several weeks, I think, in the UK and in France visiting. They went around all the different bases in the area, came to Matching. I think they had a church service. I think that was the last big return for the men. May last year, a group of us put on a commemoration in association with Matching Church. We used one of the Nissen huts at the hospital site. Local farmer very kindly cleared it out for us, and we accommodated chairs in there. And we had a service, went to the memorial, and we invited various people with jeeps and other trucks to come along. And the local landowners allowed us to tour around the perimeter track and along the runways into the Fondon. Probably the largest gathering of military vehicles on site since the war. That was a very good day. Just some more photos. We had a visit from our helicopter and a flypast by a Mustang. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't get a Marauder because there are no Marauders flying, and very few Marauders in existence. None in this country. That's the largest chunk that's in the UK. It's the tail end of a plane, and that's at Boxted Airfield. If you want to see a complete one, you've got to go over to France or the States. This is in the Utah Beach Museum in Normandy, and I finally got to see my first in the flesh or metal marauder last week when I visited. Yeah, it's quite special. There is the B-26 Invader, which actually the 391st flew towards the end of the war. It features the same engines, and there was a flying example over in the UK last year. This was taken at Duxford. When we did the memorial, a friend of ours had recorded an Invader doing a fly past, and we could put it on and crank up the volume. What's going on? I wish. But that's the closest thing you get to a marauder. Just to finish off, over the years I've been collecting a few little bits. I came across this. This is a newspaper that was their anniversary review. So it was January 45 it was published, and it just gave a record of the unit's achievements over the past 12 months. I've also got some photographs that have been taken by 391st members. They're on display on the table there. A letter or two written home. And I was lucky enough to be given these 6 CDs, which are recordings of the memories of some of the marauder crew that were taken back in the, I think, 80s or early 90s. So that's about it. I put Bugs Bunny up there because the 575th actually contacted the producer of the Bugs Bunny cartoons, asking about a unit mascot, and he basically gave them this design here. So that's the 575th one. But that's everything I've got to say. I could go on, but I better wrap it up there. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take them. But thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mark. We have some lights, please. That was splendid. And now, are there any questions? Yes, then.
Who actually paid Hallingbury? Was it American money or was that British money?
I don't know. Well, I mean, they're American units, so I guess the Americans paid for that. Again, I defer to my
I'm sorry,
friend.
I didn't hear the question.
Who actually funded the building of the...
That's a difficult one.
Yeah.
It was, the building costs were over £1 million pounds. And I think it was an allied effort. I think it probably funded partly by the British and partly by the US, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What was the armament on the B-26?
Okay. Right. So they had, I think were they mainly 50 cal?
Yes.
So there was a fixed gun in the nose. There was also, some of them had a one that the bomb aimer could aim themselves. Each side of the, each side, well, okay, yeah. So fixed gun, also another gun in the nose. On either side of the fuselage, there were 4, well, 2 on each side, fixed guns that the pilot could fire. A top turret with twin guns, a rear gun position, that was twin guns, and then there were 2 waist guns either side. So they did have quite a bit of firepower, but they could be vulnerable to fighter attack.
Is there any record of them ever being used as a fighter bomber, given the fixed?
I think they did have the option of strafing. Yeah. I don't think it happened that much. When they were first introduced, they did a lot of I think low level work, and they suffered quite badly with that. after that they moved to medium, sort of higher altitude bombing. So yeah.
I think on that point, there was a case, I think it might have been the Airfield raid, where one of the pilots did actually use those package guns, and he did actually down a fighter with so yeah. I remember.
Okay. On the Airfield raid, again, that was something I was reading, that one of the issues there was that there were a lot of instances of guns jamming. And they said that when they flew from Britain and they crossed the Channel, they would test the guns, you know, make sure they were working properly. When they were based in France, there was I don't know if it was an order or an understanding that it wasn't deemed appropriate to fire the guns over French territory. And so the guns were not tested. So when they got jumped by all these fighters, as I say, they hadn't cleared or checked the guns. And that, I wouldn't say it was a, you know, it was a factor in the loss rate.
So how many members were there at the flight crew?
Generally 6. I think originally it was 7. But most, if you look at the loading lists, the crew lists for flights, they generally had 6. So there's a pilot, co-pilot, there's a bombardier in the nose, there's a flight engineer, radio operator, and they both doubled as gunners, and then there was a gunner armourer. So I think the gunner armourer was in the tail, and he was responsible for arming the plane. I'm not sure either the radio op or the flight engineer would have been in the top turret and or the waist guns. So yeah, they sort of doubled up in terms of that. Sometimes they carried 7. I've seen instances of a crew of 8, and I think I also found one of they carried 9, but the 9th was like an observer or not non-active crew member. But yeah, as I say, I think the designation was for 7, but in practice it was 6.
What were the engines?
I knew I shouldn't have invited you. Again, my learned friend.
I think they were Pratt Whitney R2600. I mean, if that
It's been absolutely splendid. You've done an enormous amount of work on this to get all that detail. And you have a wealth of information here. It's been quite fascinating. It's easy for us to remember the big picture of the war, but when you bring it down to a small unit, it's a little bit different, and it's very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.